Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. You're watching another edition of Break the Fake, where we debunk fake news and combat false narratives. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and let's get rolling. So the fuel crisis in Russia continues to push citizens to new depths of moral degradation, revealing what the Kremlin's so-called traditional values look like when things start falling apart. With oil refineries shut down for unscheduled maintenance after drone attacks and drivers spending hours, sometimes days, fighting over a few liters of diesel or gasoline, a shocking video has now gone viral. A Russian woman proudly shows off the bizarre scheme that she came up with to get around the fuel shortage. So, get this. This woman rented her friend's child with a disability, placed the child in the passenger seat, and then used that to bypass a line at a gas station by posing as someone entitled to special privileges. Instead of feeling embarrassed or trying to hide what she had done, she proudly recorded the entire stunt on her phone, smiling into the camera and congratulating herself on her own life hack.
То чувство, когда надо заправить машину, и ты взяла у подруги ребенка с инвалидностью. Взяла справочку и поеду сейчас заправлять машину без очереди. Лайфхак. Дальше меня отправили на резервную колонку. Она одна. И, в общем, начали тут заправлять. Бензин только здесь, 0,2. И идет у нас заправка. В общем, это 4-я колонка, специально для инвалидов и техники. Остальные все стоят в очереди.
The fuel crisis created by the Kremlin has accelerated the nation's moral decay. While the authorities insist the system is unshakable, Russian citizens are literally renting disabled kids just to cope with the realities of war. I mean, it's gotta be hard to preach traditional values when your society is treating a disabled child like a fuel coupon. So with all the mess going on inside Russia, Vladimir Putin decided that he needed to hold yet another everything is under control meeting, confidently declaring that the resilience of Russia's power grid is among the highest in the world. Now, according to him, attacks on fuel infrastructure have only one goal, which is to create a climate of anxiety in society. But he insisted that the goal is impossible to achieve. Now, Putin also assured those present that Russian farmers are not experiencing any fuel shortages.
Очевидно совершенно, что противник стремится нанести ущерб экономике, но самое-то главное – стремится создать нервозную обстановку в обществе. Мы с вами понимаем, что эта задача невыполнима. Запас прочности энергосистемы России очень высокий, один из самых высоких в мире. Нужно просто организовать работу вместе с вертикально интегрированными компаниями, договариваться быстрее, так, чтобы они тоже здесь не зажимали продукт исключительно в рамках своей распределительной сети, в рамках своих АЗС, а выдавали нужные продукты независимым проблем с поставками в сельскохозяйственную отрасль в данный период не наблюдается, все там обеспечено, и надеюсь, что так и будет.
The reality in Russia's fields, though, tells a very different story. While Putin projects confidence, the Kremlin's own propaganda channels are continuing to warn about a failed harvest and openly predicting a famine. For years, Russia proudly presented itself as one of the world's leading grain exporters. This season, however, farmers have been hit by one disaster after another. First, a cold spring and weeks of heavy rain threw the planting season into chaos. Then, just as the weather finally improved, Russia was hit by an unprecedented fuel crisis, a direct consequence of successful Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries. You see, an average Russian combined harvester burns about 300 liters of diesel in a single shift. Now, the problem is finding those 300 liters. Gas stations have introduced strict limits, wholesale fuel contracts have stalled, and the refinery still operating are forced to follow the Kremlin's priorities. Fuel goes first to Moscow, and then security services, officials, and speculators, and the people, well, they get whatever's left. As a result, diesel prices for farmers have risen by 30%. The cost of transporting grain by truck has increased by 20 to 30%, and real logistic costs are up another 13%.
И опять же вам вот такая цепочка. Если растениевод сейчас закупит то дистопливо по высокой цене, соответственно, ему нужно будет поднять цену на зерно. Я же, как животновод, понимаю, что я свое мясо и молочную продукцию не продам по высокой цене, потому что у вас нет денег. Поэтому, что, у меня выход какой? Я просто сокращаю поголовье, оставляю только для себя. А растениевод тоже понимает, если я раньше закупала у него 15-18 тонн зерна, то я уже столько покупать не буду. Я куплю, допустим, только 5. Тогда он тоже начинает греть свою голову и говорит, а зачем я тогда буду лезть в долги на это топливо, да, если я потом свое зерно не распродам? Я что тогда, остаюсь с долгами? Вот такая цепочка у нас получается. А Министерство сельского хозяйства, я считаю, оно вообще не тем занимается. Это не помощь аграриям, это хомут на шее для аграриев.
To offset at least some of their losses, Russian farmers have turned to an old Soviet survival strategy. Those lucky enough to secure scarce fuel often find it more profitable to just sell it under the table for 3 times the price to neighbors or middlemen than to harvest their own fields. The crops can always be written off later as another victim of the weather. For years, grain exports brought billions of dollars into the Kremlin's coffers to finance its aggression. This year, the authorities face an unpleasant choice. They can export what little grain they have left to raise money for the war while leaving Russians with less food, or keep the harvest at home and deprive the military budget of desperately needed revenue. Either way, the special military operation continues to go exactly according to plan. The Kremlin's refusal to confront the collapse of Russia's fuel and agricultural sectors once again shows where its priorities lie. While Putin boasts about the resilience of the energy system, farmers are running out of diesel, harvests are shrinking, and food security is becoming collateral damage in a war. Now, if this is what the Kremlin calls resilience, Russians may soon discover that the only thing growing reliably this season is the gap between propaganda and reality. For more than 4 years, much of Russian society either openly supported or quietly accepted aggression against Ukraine. While the occupying army was leveling Ukrainian cities and destroying civilian infrastructure, few Russians seemed to have any moral doubts. But once the war reached their own lives through chronic fuel shortages, supply disruptions, and explosions at facilities in the deep rear, the mood changed remarkably fast. One striking example is a video that has gone viral on Russian social media. Fighting back tears, a Russian woman pleads for an end to the war. But her emotional appeal is not driven by sympathy for Ukrainians. It comes from the realization that sanctions and strike on Russia's rear infrastructure have begun to threaten her own comfort and sense of security.
На заводе опять эвакуация. Какой-то кошмар творится. Мы очень далеко от того места, где все происходит. Но все-таки власти, остановите эту войну немедленно. Хватит, уже хватит. Вы даже не представляете, сколько сил и труда стоит, чтобы построить это все. Каждый день, каждый строитель столько времени упахивается на этом заводе. Некоторые семей своих не видят. А вы, сволочи, что творите? Может быть, уже хватит это творить? Остановите это немедленно, хватит! Последний замечательный завод хотите уничтожить. Чего вы добиваетесь этим? Зачем заставлять такое количество людей страдать? Зачем? Остановитесь, хватит! Нет войны, хватит! С обоих сторон хватит этих БПЛА и ракет и всего прочего. Да живите вы мирно, в конце концов! Сколько можно?
The video is a reminder that, for many, the war only became a tragedy once it reached their own doorstep. As long as missiles were falling on Ukrainian cities, it was framed as historical justice. But when the consequences finally reached Russia, the patriotic slogans suddenly disappeared overnight. It turns out that supporting war is much easier when someone else's neighborhood is burning. And with that, we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.